Welcome to the Fourthstream podcast, where we are dedicated to finding hope. You can count on us to do our research and invite you into a dynamic learning process of authenticity. You can find lots of hopeful resources at fourthstream.com.
During the COVID experience that we all went through in different ways, we had a good friend who lost his life. He had some mitigating circumstances. He was in his early 50s, and his name is Dave, and just had known him for many years and watched him go through the whole process and go through the process of dying. And during his last months of life, and even before the COVID infected him and then eventually took him, he felt like God was telling him to love more deeply, love his wife more deeply, love his son more deeply, love his friends more deeply. So, you know, it's kind of, when I talk about the subject of today, that's kind of a backdrop for me. And as I watched him die there with his wife and with his son, I was so struck by watching a person who had been suffering and watching them die in faith. Because I've seen people die not in faith. And I don't want to make this all about death, but you know, the reality of life is that it ends, right? And before I start talking about the ultimate promise, I want to talk about kind of the ultimate way to live. And I think my friend Dave had it right. I think doing everything I can to love more deeply is probably the best thing that I can dedicate myself to. That being said, I want to talk about the ultimate promise today. And this is actually this photo. I was at a doctor's office the day that my friend died, and because I had to go to a doctor's appointment that day, and this panorama showed up. So this is taken with my iPhone out the window, and have been used it at his memorial because you know, it's just a beautiful picture of, even though there's difficulty, there's promise, and I hope for that. I really want to believe that philosophically. I want to believe that scientifically. I want to believe that in my faith, that there is ultimate promise. And so that I have several questions that, you know, you kind of get used to listening to me, and if you come back, which, you know, is totally up to you, obviously, but asking questions is just really healthy. It's healthy for me. I feel like people become small when we stop asking questions, or we think, I finished my education, I'm not going to ask more questions. I am most stimulated by people who are learners and who continue to learn. And so asking questions is a big deal to me. So the first question that I'd like to share and ask with you: what if it were possible to have every up and down of your earthly existence count for something significant? And I'm not just talking about the victories and the successes. I'm talking about the downsides as well as the upsides. What if they could all count for something significant? Second of all, what if we were to escape the ultimate fragility and futility of our limited years on earth? I mean, there's nothing we can do about it, at least not to date, it doesn't appear like, to keep ourselves from only having a certain number of years. And now that we know what we know about the cosmos and about time, we kind of look at it and go, you know, 70, 80 years, not very long, 50 years, 40 years, it just depends on how many years we're given. But what if we are able to escape the ultimate fragility, and I do use the word fragility intentionally, and also futility, and I use that as well because those are two things that philosophers think about when they contemplate ultimate meaning. So what if that could happen? And then the third thing is, what if we could begin again? What if you could start over? You ever have that feeling when you get done with a year, or you get done with a trial or a difficulty or whatever, and you go, what if I could just start again with a cleaned and a durable slate, not one that I'd have to clean off later, and that physically and mentally and emotionally I could start all over again. What if that could happen? What would that be worth to a mind? What would that be worth to a heart? What would that be worth to a soul? And then my last question, well, actually it's not. I'll throw another one on here. But what if the beauty of science, philosophy, and faith converging together? What if that kind of beauty, and I'm talking about in purity, all three of those things in purity, because, everything that we say is scientific isn't, because it has politics involved, and everything in philosophy isn't true, and everything in faith, can be opportunistic. So I'm not, trying to make something different than it really is, but what if that is what's converging? And what if the purest of science and the purest of true philosophy and the purest of faith, what if those are all a part of the mind of God and they're coming together? And finally, what if that kind of a reality never ended? I think that's what the Bible calls heaven. And the idea is that it really is a different kind of existence, even though it does have things that we can recognize about it in the context of what our lives have looked at. So, just a couple more things about death. If you want to tune out here for this slide, you can just cover your eyes. Death is a huge problem. Physically, death is ugly. You can talk about it being beautiful all you want, but there are just a lot of ugly things to death. The beauty of it is if there's hope, but there's not always hope when people die. So physically, death is ugly. Second of all, to date, no one has escaped death. We have not been able to pull that off, except for one person, I think, if I understand the data correctly. And then third of all, death is a huge problem because despite religion, philosophy, and science, no one has provably solved the issue of limited existence. And also, most people fear death, even though we do our best to manage the fear. And I've noticed this with older people, we get tunnel vision as we get older, and that's how we push out the fear of it. Heard a story the other day about a guy who was running up and down in a care facility, and the nurse said, well, he's got a lot of unsettled issues. He was in a hospice situation, and some people were laying there, and this guy was going up and down the hall, and the nurse said he's got a lot of things to work through. He has unsettled things. I thought that was really poignant. And most people fear death, even though we do our best to manage it. Also, this is really interesting because I wish this message really would have gone out as the core and stayed the core of the religious message historically, but Jesus claims to have power over death, and there is a great body of proof that he does have that. So, in the context of the God story, death reversal gives us markers of hope. So, the prophecies, hundreds of years of promises and fine-tuned delivery. Jesus didn't just show up out of the blue. There were hundreds of years of preparation. Some of that prep work related to Elijah and Elisha, who are pictures of John the Baptist and of Jesus. And Jesus raised the widow's son, and he raised Lazarus. So there was all this prep work to get us ready for the fact about what he was going to do. And then he did it. And during that time, 40 miracles were recorded. Can you imagine if you were the second cousin of somebody whose leprosy was healed by this guy from Galilee? How would that have impacted your family? And thousands of people were personally impacted, and that leads to follow-up. The world was absolutely turned upside down by what happened with Jesus. Because what happened with Jesus and what the witnesses looked at and what Jesus showed us was going to happen by raising the dead is that he was going to be raised from the dead by his Father, and he had the authority to do that. And that's the nature and the purpose of the four Gospels. It's reporting to us all of those encounters and then that reality and how the world was turned upside down because thousands and then millions of people were impacted by the resurrection, by the conquering of death, which is the ultimate promise. And what's neat about this isn't just a story. It's very much a promise that's been given to us. So I'd like you to indulge me for a second. I am a Bible guy, although I do a lot of reading, and I have historically done a lot of reading. But this guy Lazarus is an interesting character because in Lazarus you can kind of see pictures of what's going to happen with the resurrection. I just want to read these few passages real quickly. This is kind of Lazarus's resurrection in just a quick story. Verse 43 of chapter 11. When he said these things, after Jesus said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come forth." And tada, Lazarus does. But chapter 12, 1 and 2, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom he had raised from the dead. And so they made him supper there, and Martha was serving, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. So not only did Jesus raise this guy from the dead, he went and had dinner with he and his sisters, and I think it's just it's an amazing thing in this story of Lazarus, what kind of experience is being described here. And then a little bit further down, the large crowd of the Jews then learned that he was there, and they came not only for Jesus' sake only, but they wanted to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. And so you just picture hundreds and maybe thousands of people coming to see the result of the story, and maybe knowing more about it the closer they were to the story. But this is really interesting. In chapter 12 and verse 10, it says, "But the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death as well, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and were believing in Jesus." And a little bit further down it says, "So the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb," so they saw it and was raised from the dead, "they continued to tell their friends, to tell their neighbors about it." Now this is important because it happened very close to the time that Jesus did conquer death and gave the ultimate promise, which is what I want to spend the rest of this conversation talking about. The raising of Jesus's body, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, the power of death was impacted, and because death was dealt an enormous blow. Remember I talked about earlier that we haven't been able to resolve the issue of death. It's just going to happen. You can count on it. Death and taxes, I think somebody said. But this situation with Jesus dealt death an enormous blow. And the door to forever life was opened through faith as Jesus conquered death. And it says in 1 Corinthians 15, death was swallowed up by triumphant life. It's really kind of an amazing thing, and this impact isn't just like a worldwide impact. It just keeps springing up in history over and over again. This durable message that makes the message of Jesus and the faith in Jesus different than any other religion, including Christianity, on the face of the earth. So the impact was just incredible. And I guess I would end this brief conversation together with you to just say, investigate this yourself. Check it out yourself. If what happened in here can be counted on, and I think that's really a legitimate question, and I've pursued that, and I've determined for myself that yes, I can count on the fact that what's talked about here really did happen. So if that is true, then that means the power of death was overcome by a man. Yes, he was God, but he was 100% man. And when he did that, he conquered death for everybody who believes in him. So fast forward, one of these days, probably in the next 30 days to 10 years, you'll probably hear that I've cashed it in, because that's the nature of life, right? And when you hear that, and when I see it coming, I am going to be counting on the fact that the door to forever life has been opened by the one who gave this picture, this testimony in the Bible by coming to earth and showing us how death was going to be conquered. And I would just extend to you the invitation to check that out for yourself. Where do you stand on that whole issue of, did it really happen? Can I count on the testimony? Is it more than just a bunch of religious stories? Why in the world did the chief priests want to kill Lazarus? The guy had been raised from the dead. And why do people that we live with in our century want to so quickly dismiss this amazing thing that happened in Galilee, or happened in Galilee, and then also happened in Bethany, and then also happened in Jerusalem? So, just a thought. It's I think really it is the ultimate. It is the ultimate promise. If this is true, and if you could take this to the bank, then what is it worth to you? What is it worth to me? I mean, what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Answer, nothing. Especially when God has blessed you and me with the opportunity to find this entrance into forever life. I hope it's for you. If you have it, I hope you value it. And I hope if you are questioning and wondering if it's true, I hope you pursue it with passion and with heart, because it is a beautiful thing. Death swallowed up by triumphant life. Selah.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. You can find posts and podcasts on tons of subjects at Fourthstream.com, along with encouraging music which can be shared by a variety of ages. Finding hope at Fourthstream.com.